Hello friends, this is Growl. With the release of Shadowlands comes a host of new dungeons, and after playing all of them several times, I'm going to do my best to rank them. They're making changes every day, however, I think for the most part, the design and flow of the dungeons aren't going to change much from here on out. First, let's talk about what makes a good dungeon in my eyes as a high M+ player. First is aesthetics. I want the dungeon to look cool and feel different. The mechanics, animations, mobs, and bosses should all be different and stand out. At the same time, the dungeon should still function well. Going through the jail cells of Holdagore was super cool, however, the close corridors led to bad camera controls and glitchy walls. It's a tough balance because when you think of a dungeon, traditionally you think of some underground cavern. However, ultimately, we're going to play these dungeons a whole hell of a lot, so it shouldn't feel clunky at all. Next, and maybe most importantly, is the layout. Mythic Plus is about strategy and speed, so there should be different ways to go about completing a dungeon. Even on your first playthrough, being able to choose where you go and explore is big for me. Any dungeon with no alternative pathways or decision making is automatically losing points in my book. The bosses and trash mobs should feel fun. Tons of annoying caster mobs forcing you to pull slowly, as well as mobs that don't do anything and just auto attack the tank, both feel bad. There needs to be a balance where combat is engaging but not feel like a chore. Boss fights should also be challenging but not drag on. Mechanics need to feel fair and test your ability to juggle your rotation while still thinking on the fly. Overall, I think the strongest part about Dungeons and Shadowlands right now is the bosses. Maybe it's just because they're all new, but they all feel so fresh and fun to me. Any dungeon mechanics also need to be good. A dungeon doesn't have to have unique mechanics to be good. However, if they're present, they should be something that add to the experience, not something that just automatically kills stuff while you stand there. This is a tough one, because I'd like to give Blizzard the benefit of the doubt for tuning these. However, many mechanics from BFA dungeons constantly changed even when the game was live or were out of whack for the entire expansion. Lastly is replayability. If you're going to push high Mythic Plus, you're going to be doing these dungeons over and over and over. This is somewhat related to the layout, but the most important factor here is that you're going to have a good time playing these dungeons after you've have all the mechanics mastered. Things that force you to think on the fly or prefer, and not just a simple dance where you pray that nobody messes up. I'm going to omit tuning from this discussion. I'm going to assume that the dungeons are fairly balanced in difficulty, even though they aren't right now in their current state. I'm also going to include Covenant-specific bonuses for this omission. I'm going to assume that you always have the Covenant bonus, and I'm not going to worry too much about groups that are going through without it. Now let's talk about my ranking system, which will be ranked in tiers from S to D. S tier is reserved for dungeons that I think are good or great in all areas, and that will be fun to play on release. A tier are for dungeons that are decent but have one or two big flaws that make them not great. B tier are for dungeons that I think are average, stuff that doesn't really bother me but also I wouldn't consider great. C tier are for those that are pretty bad but at least have a little bit of redeeming qualities. These ones could be good if they had some big overhauls, but I don't think they would happen. D tier is for my least favorite, ones that I think that I'll end up dread playing, and that I can't see a way that I would make them better. So let's start with our ranking. The first one is D Other Side. More like D Other Side. Other Side is one of my least favorites. It's extremely linear in that you decide which way you go at the start, and then you're stuck going on a straight line for the rest of the dungeon. There's almost no variety in what you decide to kill. You're essentially just clearing the entire instance of trash. The second wing with the Mechanome stuff is an absolute nightmare. Incredibly low ceiling with tight walls, and it's really rough to see anything. The worst part by far is the backtracking and checkpoints. Not only is there a lot of running, but once you clear two of the wings, it doesn't wrap back around or have any sort of portal or way to get back. You just turn around and walk all the way back out. The bosses are alright aside from the last boss, which is going to be a pug nightmare. You essentially just have this survival thing going on where damage to the boss doesn't even matter at all. Then you make it to the intermission and you have to split up and kill these 4 different ads. You almost don't even have time to get where you need to go, and if you don't go right away, you're just dead because the boss one-shots you if you stay on his platform. Next is Halls of Atonement, which I'm going to place in the S tier. I think right now it's universally agreed that Halls of Atonement is one of the best dungeons. A majority of it happens in the battlements and courtyard of this big castle. There's tons of room to move around and decide what you want to do. There's even groups that are like slow falling off of the edge of the castle and then running around to these stairs. The bosses are pretty fun, and there's a mix of single target, cleave fights, and big AoE. After the second boss, you enter the castle and it becomes a bit straightforward for there, but it's only a small portion of the dungeon. It's maybe 1/5 of the count or so. I think the dungeon is a bit undertuned right now. However, to me, it's still really fun to play. I think I'm going to put Mists of Tirna Scythe in the A tier. I think it earns its spot here simply for the middle area. Blizzard adds a lot of flavor and non-combat stuff in dungeons, but most of it doesn't feel fun at all or doesn't mesh with Mythic Plus. However, the guessing game is actually pretty unique. I really hope a good weak aura never gets developed for it because it's really fun to go through the gauntlet. You have 4 different icons and you have to find and pick out which one is different to find your way through the maze. In a coordinated group, you can be running around doing this while you're fighting the trash to speed things up, which to me makes it really fun. The biggest problem of the dungeon is its linear nature. The entire dungeon is completely linear. There's almost no decision making with regards to pull, at least for the first 2/3 of it. The last part isn't too bad. I think if the beginning was more open, if it was like a big circle before the first boss and you could pull different stuff, I think this one might have been S tier for me too. Next, Necrotic Wake, I'm going to put in the C tier. Other people seem to like Necrotic Wake, however, it's one of my least favorites. Right away at the entrance of the dungeon, you're faced with this huge mess of all these different caster mobs and these casts that blow up your whole group, or these long stuns that require melee kicks. And then on top of that, the first boss is a pug nightmare. It spawns these little maggots that fixate on people and then stack up a debuff, and when you get hit 3 times, it's basically a wipe. I can definitely see pugs on the first couple weeks just immediately wiping to that, and healers not knowing what's going on because it just like does unhealable level damage. There's definitely some wide openness to this dungeon, which I like. However, there's one big problem. 50% or actually more of the trash in the dungeon is in the very last room, in this sort of like weird gauntlet thing before the last 2 bosses. This means, yeah, the beginning is open, but if you try and fight your way through the starting area, you'll just end up way over count unless you use shroud skips. The gauntlet area before the 3rd boss feels really clunky with Prideful as well. It's like a pack spawns and you fight it and then you'll spawn a Prideful, but then the next pack will just spawn and auto aggro to you, and then you'll just wipe because you have a Prideful mob with another pack. The last boss is also pretty bad. There's virtually no mechanics. There's like some swirlies that spawn under you that you can just press your auto run button to avoid. It puts DPS players in a gauntlet that's kind of cool. However, while they're doing that, there's nothing for healers or tanks to do. I think this one is one of my least favorites for sure. Plaguefall. I think I'm going to put Plaguefall in the B tier. It's a dungeon that has potential to be really good, but it has a few things in it that are pretty annoying that I'm not sure they're going to be fixed. The boss fights are pretty fun. The last boss is a bit overtuned right now, but it's an awesome mix of healing and dodging and DPSing. The first 2 areas are really big and open, with a couple different pathways and a lot of different mobs that give you options on what you want to pull. The beginning has these mushroom mines that are like really frustrating. They constantly respawn and they cover like almost the whole area and knock you away when you get hit by them. I don't mind a few of them. However, they're like nearly everywhere. It makes it impossible. It feels really claustrophobic and frustrating to move around this area. And it feels like once one thing goes wrong, like everything goes wrong. They added them some point during beta, and I'd kind of like to see the number of them maybe get cut in half. The area after the second boss is also kind of weird. It's like this huge open area with these slime tentacles that force you to fight them, or they pulse AoE, and they're like out in the middle of the slime lake or whatever. It's just, it feels really weird. It's like it sort of like entices you to be able to skip, but you can't actually skip, and it's like it's a little strange. There are also some really big pulls in this dungeon, which would feel great. However, the target cap makes it rough for anyone playing a capped class to compete. Next is Sanguine Depths. I think I'm going to put this one in the B tier as well. I think I'm going to put this one better than Plaguefall, just slightly. It's an RA dungeon. To me, the boss fights really carry this one. All the bosses have some like fun dodge mechanics, a bunch of healing, a little bit of damage check. The trash has some nice variety of mechanics. However, the close quarters makes it really rough. In a dungeon like this, it can be really difficult to see since the hallways are so narrow, and the trash mobs or boss mechanics that involve like dodging or frontals are just really frustrating because like you take 2 steps and then your camera goes into a wall and you can't see in front of you, and then 3 seconds later you're dead. Also, this one is a bit linear too. There are a few parts where you can decide what you pull, but for the most part, you're going in a straight line. One thing that's cool is the Covenant specific thing. It has these urns that you can drag mobs into, and if you kill them in the urns in a short time, you get a buff. I think that was the most unique and interesting mechanic that I've seen for a dungeon. My favorite part though, I think, is the last boss. It's like a gauntlet how you're still fighting trash, however the boss is like coming in periodically while you're fighting the trash, like to cast some of the abilities, and then as you get the boss a little bit lower it comes back and you continue pushing through the gauntlet. So it wasn't executed super well. It could have been like really fun, but that was one of my favorite parts, I think. Next, I'm going to put Spires of Ascension. It hurts me, but I'm going to have to put it in the C tier. Aesthetically, it's an awesome dungeon. You're going across these like sky platforms fighting angel robots. It's super cool looking, and it's also like from a camera perspective super open. You have no problems with your camera. You can always move around. I think this one is my favorite looking dungeon. A lot of the mechanics of the trash feel like pretty well designed. There's lots of dispels and frontals and casts that you have to interrupt and some pulsing AoE. The biggest problem to me, though, is the layout. The dungeon is so linear with almost no decision making what you pull. There are some open areas at the end, but a majority of the dungeon is just go in a straight line. The end, like the very, very end before the last boss, is really bad. There's these 3 angel mini bosses that are all like sort of next to each other, but you have to fight them one by one. It wouldn't be too bad if you could like decide to fight 2 and 2 or maybe even 3 together, but they put this stacking debuff on you that lasts 30 seconds, and then they full heal each other when you kill one of them. It's like they put them all there, but then they don't want you to fight them together, but it's kind of weird. The other horrible part about this dungeon is the amount of roleplay time. To get from platform to platform, you have to like take these angels, you just click on them and then they just drag you across the like space of the platform. Sometimes the angels take upwards of 15 or 20 seconds, and it's such a big break in the action. You literally can't even move your character. With Prideful, it feels really bad because you will like get count and then you'll kill your Prideful mob and you'll get the buff and you'll be like, all right, time to go. And then there's nothing to kill. And then you just click on this angel and you're like flying. And that happens with like, it can happen with multiple Pridefuls in the dungeon. Maybe there'll be routes to get around it, but I think in the Pug experience might be pretty similar to that. I would like to see the roleplay time of the angels just be instant. If it was some like, it's cool for a flavor thing, but after you play the dungeon, I don't want to get carried around. I just give me a portal or something so I can get across the gaps. And last is the Theater of Pain. I'm actually going to put this one in the A tier above Miss. I didn't expect to like Theater of Pain at first. However, this one's really starting to grow on me. The beginning is like really cool. You're walking down this stairway in this like undead coliseum where you fight the first boss, and then you get put underground and there's a bunch of different paths to go. It's sort of like the other side with 3 different paths. However, you can decide which way you go, and then as you finish the path, it ends in the middle so that, okay, you're done with this path, now I can go on the other one. So instead of having to walk all the way back and then you have to go in the same order, you can pick whatever order you want, and there's like very little RP time. There are a few areas that are a bit claustrophobic, especially in like the tunnels, but overall I think this one was really fun for me to play and pretty fun to heal. And that's all 8 dungeons. I wish there were more. Hopefully in a future update they'll release some more and I'll make a new video with my updated thoughts after playing them a bunch of times, but for now that's it. Thanks for watching. I left a link to the Dungeon Maker tier list in the description if you want to try and make your own list. Just be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed it. I'll be making tons of Mythic Plus content. Happy keying.